Get full episodes of The Damage Report as a podcast on iTunes and Android, and you can watch the live show every weekday on YouTube TV. Now on The Damage Report, the Nation's associate Washington editor is Zoe Carpenter. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. So I want to start off, we're going to talk obviously about the midterms. How did your expectations going into yesterday's elections compare to the reality that played out?
Well, I think the reality that played out was pretty consistent with the polling we had. So I won't deny that I was hoping for upsets in places like Texas and Florida. But I think really the results there were pretty astounding considering how stacked the landscape was against those Democratic candidates and the historic nature of the campaigns that they were running. They were trying to do something very difficult. And so in the House, I think that also corresponded pretty generally to what the polling suggested. So no huge surprises for me.
So and no standout races that really went not the way you expected?
Oh, well, okay, Wisconsin and Kansas, I think the governor's races in those states were very surprising to me. The fact that we have a Democratic woman winning in Kansas, I think is, that's great. And that was not a race that I was expecting to turn out that direction.
So, hi Zoe, this is JR.
Hey.
So with a mix of, I guess people are seeing it as a mixed results last night, except for the president.
Yeah.
So when you have results that are surprising, like you said, in Wisconsin and Kansas, but then things that are also surprising the other way, like Florida and the Senate race in Texas, not necessarily surprising, but I guess disappointing is a better word. What is it that each of these candidates that did win that were surprising, at least for the Democratic side, versus the ones that didn't win that were disappointing for the Democratic side? Is it just simply the regions they're in, or is there something that's across the board, a go-to that's kind of a winner for Democrats, in your opinion?
I think it's pretty varied across the landscape. I think definitely the idiosyncrasies of each state matters. I think in a place like Georgia, voter suppression matters. I think race may have definitely been a factor in Florida. And in places like Texas, I think although we think of Cruz as being unpopular, he is also a very adept politician. And, he came in second in the 2016 primary. It's a real mixed result when you look at somebody like Sherrod Brown holding his Senate seat by a very comfortable 6-point margin. He's very progressive and runs against Wall Street, for example. So I don't think we can take any lessons about someone like Beto being too progressive, say. I think the truth here is that the Republicans have a base that is very active and very entrenched, and high turnout doesn't necessarily benefit the Democrats in the way that I think we've been told.
Yeah. So I know that in the day before the election, you wrote an article for The Nation talking about a number of women who were running, attempting to flip red districts. In general, how did that end up working out?
Well, I think we did see a historic number of women candidates make it into office in the House. The 3 races I was focused on were in Washington state. And because it's a mail-in state, they haven't actually finalized the results in 2 of those 3 races. So Kim Schreier, who's a pediatrician running for a district that spans the eastern part of Seattle and some rural areas east of Seattle, it looks like she's up at this point, the last time I checked today. Down further south in Washington, in the southwest part of the state, Carolyn Long is still locked in a tight race with the incumbent Jamie Herrera Butler. So both of those races are still too close to call. But I think what you did see in them were these strong female candidates that were supported by the kind of grassroots uprising that we've seen since the 26th election, which in many cases was led by women also.
So we were talking earlier in the show about the success of female candidates and a great number 1 representation going up in the Senate and the House, although still women are wildly underrepresented in both of those. And so the thing is, at the same time, you had all of these candidates, these new women running. Most of them were running as Democrats. I noticed that in cases like Brian Kemp's race, I think 76% of white women ended up voting for him. So it really seems like we're sort of moving in 2 directions here, where a lot of women still identify as Republicans, but Republicans aren't putting up female candidates anywhere near the numbers that the Democrats are. If there is going to be more representation in future races, is it going to to come almost wholly on the back of the Democrats? Or is there a path for the Republicans to start to represent women a little bit more?
I think just because Republicans are putting forward female candidates doesn't mean that they'll necessarily be representing women writ large. Someone like Marsha Blackburn was successful in Tennessee last night. I would argue that her policy positions do not represent women well in terms of being anti-choice and things of that nature, anti-healthcare. So I think you'll still see candidates like Marsha Blackburn running on the Republican ticket. But I think that in terms of women who are proudly pro-women and who are taking a stand against sexual assault and standing up for healthcare and things like that, I think that's still definitely going to come from the Democratic side.
So I know that you write quite a bit about health and the environment, and across the country we had a great number of ballot measures having to do with those two different areas. Overall, I know some still haven't been called yet, but how would you say ballot initiatives in those areas ended up turning out?
It turned out great in terms of Medicaid expansion. Red states, Nebraska, Utah, and Idaho all expanded Medicaid with pretty resounding margins. That's not too surprising to me. That's such a common sense issue. And I think, in the previous segment, you were talking about Democrats needing to put forward legislation, positive legislation in the next 2 years. I think healthcare is going to continue to be an area that is broadly popular because there are still huge coverage gaps. We did see one Medicaid expansion initiative fail in Montana, likely due to the $17 million that Big Tobacco threw against it, attacking it as an unreasonable tax increase. That's going to create a huge problem because nearly 100,000 people will lose their health insurance next year if the legislature doesn't step in and fix it.
Wow. Well, Zoe Carpenter, thank you for joining us on the Damage Report. Great to get your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for watching this clip from the Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.